everyone, it's me, Ben, or GNC Centric. So today I'm doing a new kind of video. I'm doing a response to an article that came out in the Times UK on April 8th by a journalist named Lucy Bannerman. The title of the article is "It Feels Like Conversion Therapy for Gay Children, Say Clinicians." The byline says, "Ex-NHS staff fear that homophobia is driving a surge in transgender young people." If you don't know, the NHS is the national health system for the people of the UK. So basically, this article is about 5 clinicians who used to work at a gender identity clinic in the UK, and they've all resigned over the last 3 years because of ethical issues they have with what's happening there. So in the first couple paragraphs, they mention that they used to refer about 50 people a year from their clinic to go on to get hormones, and they were mostly older males who for their entire life had had gender issues. And that now it's mostly young females who they may not have had gender issues their whole life. It's a recent thing, and they don't want to take time, they want hormones right away. So the clinicians noticed that the demographics and the numbers changed completely. And they also noticed that this is experimental because there's literally no research on how blockers affect the long-term health of someone or how hormones affect long-term health of someone who starts them as a child. Because there's now people who starting testosterone at the age of 12 and starting blockers at the age of 8. Yeah. This experimental treatment is being done not only on children, but very vulnerable children who have experienced mental health difficulties, abuse, family trauma, but sometimes those and other factors just get whitewashed, one female clinician said. If someone was suggesting plastic surgery or any other permanent change, we'd be saying, hang on, wait a minute. The clinicians have warned that complex histories and adolescent confusion over possible homosexuality are being ignored in the rush to accept and celebrate every young person's new transgender identity. Clinical psychologists carry out every initial assessment at the Tavistock. They are the gatekeepers who decide whether to refer transgender youngsters to the endocrine clinic for the next stage of treatment. Therapists once had months to work through underlying issues before making decisions on medical intervention, but the clinicians claim that young people are now routinely referred for hormone therapy after as few as 3 one-hour-long sessions. So, from the get-go, my first problem is that they refer to the endocrine clinic as the next stage of treatment. That means that the clinic operates on the assumption that every child coming in who has gender issues, the next stage for them is to get hormones. When studies show that between 60 and 80% of gender dysphoric youth desist, as in stop experiencing dysphoria as adults, that's really concerning to me. They talk about the gatekeeping. So depending on what time period exactly and depending on where, it used to be that you would have to live as your preferred sex for between 6 months to 2 years to experience what it's like before you start hormones. So you take things one step at a time and you understand the significance of what you're doing before you take permanent steps to alter your body. Now they're saying that these kids, instead of spending maybe years in therapy trying to understand what's going on, will go for 3 one-hour appointments and then get hormones to permanently change their body. Just imagine for a second that you only had 3 one-hour segments to decide what your career was going to be for the rest of your life. That's like a really irresponsible way to plan the rest of your life, regardless of what it is. This seems to me very, very lacking. So many potentially gay children were being sent down the pathway to change gender. 2 of the clinicians said there was a dark joke among staff that there would be no gay people left. I mean, I assumed that some doctors or therapists had caught on that a lot of gay kids were transitioning, but the fact that one of them would joke with the other that there'll be no gay people left just shows that they literally understand what they're doing and they don't care. It feels like conversion therapy for gay children, one male clinician said. I frequently had cases where people started identifying as trans after months of horrendous bullying for being gay. Young lesbians considered at the bottom of the heap suddenly found they were really popular when they said they were trans. Another female clinician said, "We heard a lot of homophobia which we felt nobody was challenging. A lot of the girls would come in and say, 'I'm not a lesbian. I fell in love with my best girlfriend, but when I went online, I realized I'm not a lesbian. I'm a boy. Phew.'" Yeah, the whole thing about being bullied for being gay and then being popular for being trans, that is obviously a huge motivator when kids spend their entire days at school. And then the thing about I'm in love with a girl, so I must be a boy, that's like a really juvenile way of understanding sexuality. Like, a lot of gay kids go through like a phase when they're little where they realize, I'm a girl who likes a girl, and couples are always a man and a woman, so I must be the man if I like a woman. Somebody needs to like explain to these kids to the point where they really accept it, that being gay is okay and you don't need to change gender to be straight looking. The specialist expressed concern at how little confusion over sexuality was explored when a young person requested treatment to change their body. "I would ask who they wanted to have a relationship with, but I was told by my senior management that gender is completely separate to sex," a third female clinician said. "I couldn't get on board with that because it isn't. Some people were transitioning their gender to match their sexuality." So like I just said, if you are a female attracted to females, you think, oh, I need to be a man, because that's what a couple is, a heterosexual couple. To say that sex and gender are not related is mind-boggling to me. So first of all, if you are homosexual, you're automatically gender non-conforming because you reject the gender norm that a male and a female belong together. When I identified as a male, I didn't have a male body, so I couldn't participate socially or sexually as a male. So it has a huge effect on your life and your psyche. Like if you consider yourself to be a man and you want to be with a man, then you consider yourself to be gay, but any man who would sleep with a female is not gay. So gender and sexuality are definitely connected, and people need to really consider how transitioning your child will affect their sexuality for the rest of their life and affect their ability to be in happy relationships for the rest of their life. Like, it limits your dating pool so much to be trans. And yeah, the bullied for being lesbian, of course, transition will make your life easier, but also there's no lesbian visibility anywhere, there's no butch visibility anywhere, and there's no gender non-conforming visibility anywhere. So like what often happens is if I walked into an LGBT like space right now, the first thing they would ask me is like, "Oh, what's your pronouns?" Because they assume because I'm a gender non-conforming female that I must be trans. Like, if this is happening everywhere, you eventually internalize it. And especially if you don't have any role models for what a gender non-conforming female looks like who isn't a trans man. For some families, it was easier to say, "This is a medical problem. Here's my child. Please fix them," than dealing with a young gay kid, the third female clinician said. At the service's family days, a parent was allegedly heard saying that they did not want their child to have gay friends because they didn't want them mixed up in that hedonistic lifestyle. "It is converting people into heterosexuals," one of the clinicians said. "We had so many families who would talk about not wanting their daughters to be lesbian. Young people repeatedly confided their own disgust that they may be gay, according to clinicians." So again, it's like very, very obvious environmental motivations for transition, or maybe even environmental causes of dysphoria. To discount this or dismiss this and then allow the kids to transition without ever challenging it or exploring it is definitely malpractice to me. Another clinician described how youngsters entered his room enthusing about Alex Birdie, a transgender YouTuber, and My Life, I Am Leo, a documentary about a transgender teen broadcast in a tea time slot on CBBC. So for those of you who don't know, CBBC is the Children's British Broadcasting Corporation. Something I've talked about before on my channel is young people are like very susceptible. So if they find something on YouTube that they like and they watch hours and hours and hours of it, it can kind of let their fantastical thinking go wild. They really will see it as all these people transition, so all you have to do is take the steps to transition and then your life will be better, when it's not making your life better. Like, the clinicians know that the children coming to them and the teens coming to them think this will fix all the problems in my life. But the clinicians also know that this is not going to fix all the problems in your life. And maybe they say that, but they're not deterring the kids from acting in a way that, like, would support the premise that it's not fixing everything. One female clinician estimates that she referred about 50 young people for puberty blockers. She now believes she referred too many. Their outcomes remain unclear. When you start them on puberty blockers, you're putting them on a pathway that could lead to sexual dysfunction problems and, for younger kids, will definitely make them infertile. In what other specialism would physical intervention that leads to permanent change to the body be the first line of treatment for a vulnerable child? Activists will tell you it's unethical not to intervene, but we know that not everyone with gender dysphoria will go on to identify as trans for the rest of their lives. So yeah, children who experience dysphoria and then desist, it usually happens after puberty, after they've accepted their sexuality. So if you stop puberty, you've stopped that process, and you've, as this person said, you've changed the path of that child. So it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you stopped that kid's puberty and now their body is being sent in the direction to be the opposite sex, even if they wanted to detransition, like, the steps that you would have to take and your options are so limited that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it says in the article that they're not allowed to discuss sexual dysfunction because the clinic basically thinks it's taboo to discuss sexual stuff with children. But if you're giving them drugs that will prevent them from ever getting an erection, or if you're giving them drugs that will make them infertile, or if you're giving them, like, there was a story, if you're giving them hormones that could possibly make every orgasm painful, that's definitely something you should discuss with them first. Because the whole point of giving hormones is to make someone's life better. If sexual dysfunction is very serious and affects your ability to be intimate with a partner, so this will affect the quality of their life long term. So again, I think the duty of care is not being taken seriously if your only concern is giving the kid what they want in the moment and not what's best for them long term. There's part of the article where there was one of the clinicians tried to turn down a child who wanted hormones, and the parents got a lawyer involved and sent a threatening letter to the clinic, and then the clinic sent the kid for hormone blockers eventually. So, to me, this shows that the whole gatekeeping process is basically a charade. If all you have to do to get hormones or blockers when the clinicians disagree is threaten to bring a lawyer, this is all a charade. Anybody can get hormones, that means, basically, to me. One case has haunted her. All the pushing was coming from the father to put the kid on puberty blockers. Thinking back on it now, I fear that the father was a pedophile and the child was being abused. There is no suggestion that the service knowingly ignored the case, and the outcome is unknown. If you yourself are trans or part of the queer community, you probably are aware that a significant portion of trans people experienced sexual abuse of some kind as children. Just statistically, children who experience sexual abuse, it's usually from the father. So what this woman describing makes complete sense to me. Honestly, almost every or vast majority of trans people I know have some kind of past trauma in their life, whether it's sexual or familial or domestic. It's something, and it has something to do with the way that they see themselves. And I really think that must be unpacked before you can address gender. Yeah. So, like, I honestly think it should be something that people at these clinics are looking out for, because it's so common in trans kids. The clinic, which is run by the Tavistock and Portman Foundation Trust, and whose director is Polly Carmichael, said it is tracking the progress of 44 young people who began puberty blockers in 2011, and that all available evidence is discussed with families. Quote, "This is a rapidly developing field, and psychological and medical professionals are working hard to ensure that we respond to emerging evidence in an appropriate and considered way," a spokesman said. The growing body of international evidence showed that, thus far, there is little reported evidence of harm, he said. So, if you're trying to keep up with the rapidly developing field of psychology and medicine, what changes have you made since you opened this clinic? In what ways have your policies changed between 2011 and now? Like, since the Lisa Lippman study came out, have you changed your policies? I really doubt it. Oh, and then it says they haven't seen much evidence of harm. Most people who detransition, they just stop seeing their doctor or therapist. Or from the ones that I know who went back, they went back like once and told their doctor they're detransitioning, and they don't actually have any medical advice for them because there's literally no science about what you should do when you stop taking hormones or after you've taken blockers and you want to go back. So if there's harm being done, I really doubt these are the people who would even know about it unless they actively looked for it. I mean, if you decide to detransition, you wouldn't go to the people who blindly enabled your transition in the first place. They're obviously the last person you trust in that situation. And little evidence of harm. Like, it could be a long-term thing. Like, if you're starting kids on blockers and then putting them on hormones, they will eventually develop issues with, like, their heart or their liver or their bones or something. It just would probably be, like, a matter of time, which, again, we don't have any studies, so we don't know. The whole service should have been halted when the number of transgender cases first exploded, one of the clinicians said. That's the point we should have stopped because we didn't know what we were doing. Are we a service for kids with gender dysphoria, a medical disorder, or are we a service for transgender kids? 100% this. Something that detransitioners have been saying for a while, and also gender critical feminists have been bringing up, is that therapists have literally no way of differentiating between rapid onset gender dysphoria, autogynephilia, just general gender confusion, or people who have real dysphoria and will eventually desist. Therapists have literally no way of knowing what kind of dysphoria this person is suffering from. However, they all have one treatment: give them hormones. To me, this is mind-boggling. In no other field would you say, oh, it doesn't matter what they have, give them all the same treatment. They're not really skeptical, and they're not really looking into the difference between transgenders and, like, actually dysphoric children. Yeah, which is just so concerning to me. One clinician said it was understandable if her former employer was defensive, saying, "If they are getting it wrong, you have to ask, are they making kids infertile by mistake? Because if they are to truly acknowledge our concerns, then they will have to ask themselves, what the fuck have we done to thousands of children?" I completely agree with this. When you put a female on blockers and testosterone, you're basically putting them through menopause. All of this stuff is irreversible. Like, once you've removed someone's breasts, what can you do? Give them fake breasts? Once you've given somebody a vaginoplasty, there's no way to revert that. It's kind of, at this point, I think a lot of clinics are, like, hunkering down in their position because the more people detransition and the more people have serious health problems because of what these clinics enabled, the more problem it would be for them if they said, oh, we changed our policies, because then they will be open to lawsuits for people who said, oh, well, your old policy affected me badly. So I kind of understand why clinics would not change their mind, but it's so ridiculously unethical and horrifying to me that they're just, like, basically sterilizing an entire generation of gay youth whose parents thought they were trans and brought them to a gender clinic. Gyres, gendered intelligence, and mermaids which are all like transgender advocacy groups in the UK, all deny they view transition as a cure-all or that they exert any undue pressure. Susie Green of Mermaids said the charity, quote, does not encourage parents to demand any particular treatment, end quote. Gendered Intelligence said that the allegations against it were, quote, unfounded. Bernard Reed, founder of Guyers, said, quote, in medical literature, failure to provide timely treatment is described as psychological torture. As far as we are aware, GIDS has adequate safeguards against irreversible treatment being given inappropriately. The last sentence is ridiculous to me. In one sentence, the guy is saying they have adequate safeguards, which implies that they know when to say no to hormones. And at the same time, he's saying not giving hormones is psychological torture. You can't have it both ways. I have like two big questions for the people running this clinic. My first question is, since we know most dysphoric youth desist as adults, what percentage of youth came to you, were dysphoric, and then desisted? Because you should have a significant number of those children. My second question is, under what circumstances could a dysphoric child come to you and not get hormones? Because I don't believe every single dysphoric child needs hormones, but there's no group of children who are not being given hormones and waiting until they see how they feel as they grow into their bodies. Yeah. Throughout this article, they mentioned a couple of times where there was like an internal review or somebody brought up some questions, and every single time the management of the clinic just say, oh, everything is fine, we're being ethical. I find this very disturbing, that they're incapable of genuine self-criticism and genuine change within their clinic. So I just have like a few statements I want to make about pediatric transition. So first of all, you have to consider, is the child in question suffering from so much dysphoria that it justifies lifelong hormones? In the majority of cases, it's not that bad. Do the child and the parents both comprehend the effects of hormones? So, like for example, for females, there's a high chance that you'll need to have your uterus removed because it'll eventually atrophy after years on testosterone. Like, do females comprehend that that's a possibility every time a female starts taking hormones? And then also just like other side effects, like increased chance of cancers, increased chance of stroke, increased circulatory issues, things like that, osteoporosis, arthritis. Every single child needs to unpack, or every single dysphoric person needs to unpack their trauma and their sexuality before they can transition, because those things are often linked and you can't make a responsible choice about transition if you haven't deciphered what's really going on inside you. Environmental considerations really need to be taken seriously. So, like, if you grew up in a very conservative background, or if your parents are very homophobic, or if you're being bullied at school, like, all this stuff needs to be taken into account, because it all has an effect on who you are. I think there are kind of like 3 ways to treat a dysphoric child. First way is this, affirmation only, which is, if your child says they're trans, you have to agree they're trans, give them hormones, change their names, or else they'll kill themselves. The second is the watch and wait approach, which is, it has different, there's different ways of doing it, but I think that you should allow your child to experiment with gender or to reject gender, but not actually start any medical changes until they're 18 at least. And then the third option is to kind of parse out exactly why you feel the way you do about your body, why you feel the way you do about your sexuality, and then trying to address it or learn to cope with it, which is basically what a lot of detransitioners end up doing. And which I think every single trans person should go through that process, and then if they still feel they need transition, after learning to cope with living in the body they live in, then that's their choice. But you need to have control over your body, and you need to acknowledge what's happening in your body before you can make a choice like that. So yeah, that's my video. I know it's really depressing. If you have any other articles or something that you want me to do a response to, feel free to send it to me. As always, the comments are open for comments, discussions, ideas for future videos, and questions. In the description is a link to this article. Also, my Patreon, PayPal, and Ko-Fi are in the description. And, please like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks for watching. Bye.